Workers Guild, and have been active in supporting public education for many decades. So and with the HEAT group. So maybe we can just go around the room. Rick?
Oh, okay. My name is Rick Baum. I've been teaching part-time at City College for over 20 years. And I also was a member of HEAT, the Higher Education Action Team, started about a year and a half ago to fight. It was started by part-time faculty because of our two-tier contract and the way that we're so exploited. But it's quickly turned into a community student group for those who are interested in it. And I guess at some point we should post the website. So that's my introduction.
Okay,
should I just go next? Madeline or Rika?
Rika?
Yeah.
Sure. My name is Rika from AFD 1493. That is a faculty union of San Mateo Community College District. I'm a sociology faculty there, and also I'm on executive committee of the union local and an organizer. I think I'm gonna today talk a little bit about this kind of recent updates from our contract fight and related to two-tier system. Do I popcorn it to somebody? I don't know. John?
That's easiest.
John.
Hang on, I'm still sending to the correct password to my list.
Okay, maybe you can go, Madeline.
Okay, I'm Madeline Mueller, chair of the music department, City College. I started teaching at City College in 1965. You do the math. I've been a chair, and we have our own union, the DCC union, since the early 70s, I guess. Time just. And I belong to probably every, at least now, or have belonged to every organization there is. And I'm a concert pianist, and today I'm going to play a recital later on this afternoon live, the first time in a year. It's kind of exciting.
Great.
Yeah.
Congratulations. We need music in this world.
Yeah. Oh,
Definitely.
yeah. Oh, somebody else?
Harry, and then
Harry?
Bob.
Hi, my name is Karen Panitch, and I teach at Laney College in the ESL department. I've been there since 2000, and I'm the part-time union rep for the PFT. And what else? I was working at CCSF for about 5 years until last spring, when 250 part-timers got laid off, and I was one of them. So I am just teaching at Laney at this point. And I'm just going to be talking about, sort of updates, what's been happening at Peralta College. There's some good news and some worrying news. Sorry, how about we go to Andrew? You want to go ahead?
Oh, I thought we were doing just panelists, but my name is Andrew Park. I teach at College of Alameda. I'm a member of PFT 1603 exec. I'm here because our fellow exec members, Karen and John, are speaking here. And we've been doing, at PFT, we've been doing things to support CCSF, and we'll continue to do whatever we can do to help CCSF. Do I need to call on someone now? John,
you can call on me now. I think I finally managed to.
Okay, John, please.
Anyway, not a good way to start the meeting. But anyway, my name is John Holmes. I've been teaching off and on as a freeway flyer at many different colleges for the last 10 years since I got my PhD in history. I'm currently occasionally teaching at Merritt College, history, although I haven't taught a class since summer. And I'm also, together with Rika, one of our two part-time representatives on the exec board. And Karen and I have just been reelected. And aside from that, I can say that I'm trying to get a book published based on my PhD dissertation, and I'll talk about that when and if it happens. It's currently under review. And on the subject of my great uncle Noah London, who was a founder of the American Communist Party, a veteran of Russian revolutions, and a civil engineer, and who returned to his birthland of the reborn Soviet Union in the year 1926, was caught up in and was executed in the Great Terror in 1937. He was a secret dissident, as I happen to know from family information. Anyway, that's about all I'm going to have to say about that today. But since we're introducing ourselves, I thought I should mention that, especially since we're waiting for more people to show up. And who else can we introduce? I see Larry Orloff raising his hand, so you're next.
I was reaching for a piece of paper to take notes. What I just got in. What's the topic?
Introductions. Introduce yourself.
Oh, my name is Larry Orloff, and I taught in San Francisco public schools for 40 years. Retired about 12 years ago, and I was involved in the City College fight around the ACCJC when I was taking a couple of classes there. And I'm a member of HEAT right now, trying to do stuff about all these cutbacks.
So introduce a friend. Pick someone.
Okay, Madeline.
She already has.
Oh, I don't know. Karen.
Likewise. I already went. Danny, we haven't heard from you. Hi, Danny.
Oh, hi. Good morning. First, thank you, Art, for getting me into the meeting. The link didn't work, so I'm glad to be here. That's why I'm late. I'm Danny Halford, ESL, City College. I've been with City College for 15 years. I have been very active in enrollment outreach and fighting to keep the community in community college. And I'm glad to be here in this meeting. Have we heard from Harry yet?
No.
Okay.
So good morning, everyone. This is very exciting. So for 20 years, I taught in the now virtually disbanded older adults department. It does continue with the 5 or 6 classes. Also, I've been following the situation at 1550 Evans, and apparently the next meeting, there's an effort to follow up on acquiring that property and making good what Mark Rocha did. And also finally, the disenfranchisement of maybe 100,000 people who do not use computers and therefore need to have a printed schedule. And we really have to pursue that in light of all this extra money going to the chancellor, etc. So thank you. Persist. Oh, and I teach in the music department.
And next could be, we have 2 Eric Brenners. One of them should introduce themselves.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm going to disconnect from my computer. I wasn't able to hear anything, but I'm Eric Brenner. I'm from AFT 1493, long time activist in San Mateo local. And Rika told me about this. I wanted to sit in for a while, and looking forward to hearing.
And Carol Jordan is back, so she can introduce herself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Carol Jordan. I am originally from California, that big state south of me. I now live in Oregon. I taught at De Anza and Foothill colleges. I also taught adult ed from 98 to 2005, computer science courses, and then we were downsized and I had to move north. That's okay. It's nice up here. And have taught for Columbia Gorge Community College. I'm now retired and spoiling grandbabies, but I'm here just in support of part-time faculty, and I could tell more stories about losing $500,000. Yeah, the recession hit us hard, and I'm sure it's hit a lot of y'all. I don't know how you live in San Francisco without a cash. I guess you go with those little cups out on the street or whatever, but it must be really hard for y'all. I can't imagine trying to live in San Francisco without a salary.
And I see 2 Art Persicos. And they should introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm the real Art Persico. I'm just, hello. When I sent the link, somebody else just used it without changing their name. So I'm Art Persico, convener of the SF Gray Panthers, and we are very concerned about what's going on with City College and the whole privatization and mess that is being imposed on our education system in California. So I'm very glad to be here.
And would Art number 2 like to introduce herself?
Let's see, Art number.
That's you, Tina. You have to rename yourself.
Oh, how funny. I didn't even know. I was looking for Art Persecu's number 2, and I am. Anyway, I'm a member of CARA, California Alliance for Retired Americans. I taught at City College for 32 years. I worked with the Diego Rivera Mural Project, and I would really like to see it housed in what is going to be the Diego Rivera Theater, we hope someday. I also am the liaison between CARA and the American Federation of Teachers 2121 Retirees Chapter, and a member of OWL, Older Women's League. And I've been kept very busy with City College. I care a lot about it, and I would like to see it back to how it once was. I'm also going to be lobbying with CARA on the 21st. We're going to be talking to Ting and Weiner and Chu about City College. Well, actually, City College is only a very small part of what we're going to be talking about. We have 3 bills that we have as our priority. So we have a lot to handle, but I'm going to at least mention City College. And I'm afraid that if you all have any suggestions on one sentence, one minute, I could sum things up, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
You might give your name as well.
Art Persico?
Yeah.
Okay, how do I change that? I don't know how I do that. But, maybe up here. But anyway, go ahead. The other people can talk now.
That's Tina Martin for your information.
There you go.
Oh, you mean for you? I thought you meant for the law. I thought you meant for our representatives.
To rename yourself, click on more, and that gives you an option. You can find it.
Let's see. More. Yeah, okay, more. Thank you. Anyway, go ahead. I don't want to stall things for the rest of you.
Romy Sebelius, introduce yourself.
Yes, good morning. Gladly. As you can see in my name line, I'm not a member of the community colleges. I'm a professor at San Jose State University and a member of the CSU. Currently, I serve as a faculty trustee on the board of trustees of the CSU. So I joined this group, this discussion, because I'm very interested in the link between the community colleges and the CSU, about common pathways, about transfers, ADTs, also in communication with the legislators, and of course, very interested in the funding of higher education and in the possible revision of the California Master Plan for Higher Education. But since I'm not part of your group, I would totally respect if you feel more comfortable that I remove myself. I'm just there to listen and to be interested. I'm interested in your concerns. So when I have these discussions within the CSU, I have a better understanding of your challenges.
Steve, we have a few more people who can introduce themselves, so maybe we should get on with the meeting.
I think we should
go.
Meeting. Okay, thanks for all those who have introduced themselves. And again, I'm Steve Zeltzer. I'm a member of the Higher Education Action Team. I'm a journalist and have been active fighting privatization in public education in California nationally, and for many, many years, and writing about it and doing documentaries about it. And we are facing a deep crisis. Obviously, everyone on this event, this panel, and the panel knows that public education is under severe threat. And recently at San Francisco City College, we were faced with a potential layoff of 160 faculty, and there was a cut. They coerced the faculty to accept a concession contract, cutting salaries from 11% to 3%, and now they announced that they're going to increase the salary of the chancellor for the good job he's doing. neoliberal politics. Anyway, so the panel that we're having today is to discuss the attacks that are facing, why they're taking place, who's doing them, and also some proposals for action. And one of the things I did want to say is that we have initiated a call for a press conference rally on the 24th at the Board of Governors of the Community College in Sacramento as a way of bringing all people who support community colleges and public education together. And with the announcement that there's a $75 billion surplus in California, we believe that public education should be fully funded. They certainly shouldn't be laying off, shutting down the nurses program, the music program, and vocational trades at San Francisco City College, which they're doing. So without further ado, our first speaker is going to be Madeline Mueller, who is a longtime activist, music chair at San Francisco City College, and fighting to keep not just the college alive, but the music department alive, and also build a performing arts education center, which we paid for in San Francisco for years with bond measures, but for some reason it hasn't been built, despite passage of big bonds for it. So welcome, Madeline, and each speaker will speak from 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up for discussion and comments. If everyone can mute themselves who is not speaking.
Yeah, having been around in the system for a long time, many topics, and I write a lot of things out to people, and most of you maybe read my latest tomes. But I wanted to start today with something personal that goes back to the mid 70s when the AB 160, it was the Senate bill, SB 160, established union rights for teachers. And the initial way of doing it was very adversarial. Then they went through decades of win-win, and now we're back to very adversarial. But my dad was a principal of a elementary school at the time, and he was told, yes, all of you principals, now you're on the management side. And the point is, and he gave me some paperwork at the time, and I save everything, that said, yeah, negotiate with the teachers by demoralizing them, by terrifying them. And he said, what? I'm not going to do that. If you have teachers who are demoralized, then they can't teach as well as they should. It goes on to the students. It wrecks education. Why would I negotiate by terrorizing the teachers? And how? And they said, well, and I have this all on paper, you hope for a budget crisis, and if there isn't one, you create one. Does that sound familiar? And so he quit. He retired early. He said, I won't do it. And so I've watched those kinds of contexts for negotiations for decades. And we are back to that initial demoralize the faculty and wreck education for the sake of God knows what. And then it reminded me of an essay I read by George Orwell explaining fascism. And he said, he wrote this in 1948, I think. And he said, it starts with greed. People start with greed, and that goes to power through the money. And he said, and for some reason, the power is inevitably to be a bully. And this is what we've seen in this last negotiation at City, a whole bunch of bullying going on, false fiscal information. Yeah, going back to the 70s, that's the model. And then bully the heck out of the teachers, or try. And it was ugly. It was abusive. This last time I've been through many negotiations. And this is not necessary, but it is a tactic. And they managed to bully people into things this time through threatening horrible things. People couldn't sleep at night, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just beyond the pale. That's not the way you treat people, and especially in an educational institution, because the students are the ones who really will be suffering. Certainly the faculty at this point, because they haven't negotiated yet with staff, or God knows what they'll do with the administration. But for faculty to be treated this way is just, inexcusable. And there's been many years where when I've been on negotiating teams, where there's been cooperative negotiation. It doesn't have to be this way. So they're trying to do it for a purpose. And Orwell said it's almost becomes like an addiction. He used that term. He was quite ahead of his time. People get addicted to being bullies. That has to stop. Whatever's going on, that has to stop. What I did is a sort of bottom line, and I'll read something that I wrote, that what really going forward, because there's cut. I just spent a terrible half hour yesterday begging, I will beg, the Vice Chancellor of Instruction, Tom Bogle, to let my part-time faculty come back. You know, we went up to the gate on the full-time. They were going to really wipe out all the full-time faculty. We used to have 12 full-time. It was going to be down to 2. And then the part-time faculty, as a department chair, I could not put them into my schedule. So I begged yesterday. We'll find out in a couple of days. Each department head had to go in and beg for whatever little piece of the pie. There's never any information at these meetings. But the part-time faculty, I have 10 of them, some going back for 40 years in the system, world status, world famous people. The students adore them and they're really good match for City College. And I won't know. The department has gone from 100 sections a semester now down to maybe 25, but I have to beg for it. And we all do. The department chairs, we talk to each other and we know that we're all being treated this way. Some maybe worse disciplinary. Well, it's capricious. There's no criteria going on to this. So we're still in the middle of cuts. So my final, and I think I'll just go to that, is that I say as an ask, all cuts must be postponed until correct budget numbers are released and vetted. That's very important. They give numbers out. The new CFO, John Alameen, he gives numbers. They change every week. There's no way of going in and proving anything. I mean, that's part of the tactic, isn't it? So we have to have correct budget numbers. They have to be vetted by everyone. And then, and until there also cuts must be postponed until all the pandemic relief funds are received. There's a lot of moving targets going on right now, but we have to know there's relief out there, and we have to know, we have to wait and find out. And then those should be properly allocated. And that too has to be vetted, those two components. And then let's be civil to each other and quit. The other side has to be called out on being bullies. Just as a little side thing, those of you interested in the idea that the college finally has an auditorium. I started there over 50 years ago. It's the only school without a true auditorium. We're out of compliance under academic accreditation standards. We don't have the facilities to meet the needs of performing arts students. This is bizarre. And we've had approval for the project now many times. We've had funds for it. They keep disappearing. It's a scandal because the voters really need this. This is a community building. We just had a meeting yesterday with 2 now new finalists trying to get it back on track. I will cross my fingers again. It's hard to play the piano that way, but I'll try to figure that maybe this time we can get the thing finished so the mural can be brought back. If we don't have the building ready in a timely manner, the mural would go into storage. This is bad for the mural. And who knows, the last time it went into storage, it was 20 years. We can't go through that cycle again. And what I think happening, because I've been here long enough, when I started at City College, the system, we were junior colleges. It was not a community college system. All of that was progress. We're now going back 50 years retro to a time that we shouldn't in California even be speaking of. And yet the various forces out there, the privatizing and this and the state chancellor, they want that. They want power. They want to bully us from the state. They want a system that's small. And for ease of management, that's a direct quote from some of the Board of Governors, they want to propose a system that has City College of San Francisco reduced to about 20,000 students a year, maybe at best, instead of the 100,000 that we've served. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much, Madeline. And our next speaker is going to be Rika Mueller. She is with Skyline AFT 1493 chapter co-chair. So welcome to this panel, Rika.
Thank you, Steve. Hey, everyone. My name is Rika. I'm from AFT 1493. That's a faculty union of San Mateo Community College District, just a little bit south of City College of San Francisco. I'm a sociology faculty full-time, and I'm also a chapter co-chair of the Skyline College chapter of this local. I see Ali from College of San Mateo, I think, and then Eric is another person who is the editor of our union newsletter. So we are basic aid district with a very healthy budget. So I get lots of comment, hey, things must be much better in your district. And I would like to point out that we are in a very different fiscal status, yet we have lots of shared problems, such as disinvestment in education of faculty and student and administration putting their economic gains before the faculty and the students' interest in welfare. Our district is the only district in the state of California that does not meet the 50% law. So for those who are not familiar, there is an ed code section that says that the district shall spend at least 50% of their educational expenses on classroom instruction, major part of which is instructor salary. And our district's currently over 10 million short to meet 50% law. And this gap is so huge that it could not be bridged by their meager attempt to create 10 new full-timer status, full-timer positions last year, which only bridged the gap by $0.7 million. It was pathetic. And this is all the while our administrators are paid at the top-notch level and the rate in the state of California, while faculty pay rate is only at the 13th in terms of rank compared to other districts, right? And this very wealthy districts, the one that was very reluctant to commit to part-time pay parity. So if you can see the number, this is what we had before we ratify our new contract. This is brand new. We just ratified a new contract 2 weeks ago. The last stretch of the negotiation, actually our last negotiation fight lasted for 2 years and 3 months. Was the longest fight. It was a 2 MOU negotiation happening in between. The last stretch of the negotiation was the longest and the hardest, and it was about the part-time pay parity. Before our new contract, in the old contract, the average parity of our part-time faculty members were 66%. And we had only one column for part-time pay schedule. And based on this one single column pay schedule, part-time with a PhD, their parity rate was deplorable 52%. And basic aid districts struggling with the pay parity is not a very rare scenario. It's a pretty common scenario, right? San Jose, Evergreen at 69% currently pay parity rate, West Valley at 78%. While of course our parity rate was much lower in San Mateo Community College District in our old contract. So the contract fight prolonged in this last stage because just admin did not want to commit. They did not want to understand the necessity of and the rationale for the ideal pay parity. Throughout the negotiations, it looked like they tried to avoid negotiating based on the principle of the pay parity, right? Part-timers, full-timers, they do the same job. And by calibrating the amount of service work full-timers do, part-time just should be paid parity. And so, for example, the district refused initially to implement the mirror the schedule, having exactly the same number of columns and steps between full-timers, part-timers, and they were very reluctant to write in the commitment. It's just in the paper commitment to 85% parity rate. And they outright refused to reconstruct the mirror the schedule with a clear parity percentage as that building principle of the new schedule. So eventually in the new contract that we just ratified last week amongst our members, and then just last Wednesday by the board, we managed to get 85% of commitment written in, which was good, but with no timeline because they did not want to commit to future money at all. And we managed to get the mirrored columns and steps in our contract, new contract. So this is kind of building structure, hopefully for the further fight and gains for our part-time faculty members. However, the lack of substantial commitment to pay parity by our district is really beyond perpetuating the economic exploitation of our part-time colleagues. Many unions focus on pay parity and the benefits. It leaves out the other areas, important areas of exploitation and kind of delegating the part-timers in this disposable labor pool at the will workers. So for example, in the grievance process, part-timers have tremendous disadvantage, right? Because of the way the status is defined as at will. One area we did not see any progress at all, or improvement, was just job security for part-timers. Our current contract is really weak, unfortunately, in securing the seniority rights to classes by part-timers, because the dean is giving a lot of discretion in determining what the programmatic needs are to take away classes. And it happens every semester, literally. And evaluation processes, for example, are set so unevenly between part-timers or full-timers, which allows the part-timers a much shorter time to improve their performance when they get improvement performance plan and the request. Reflection that the disposable nature, the definition of institutional kind of disposability of part-time labor. Two-tier system creates, as we all know, multiple layers of vulnerability of part-timers. And sometimes the union themselves sort of accept the assumption of contingent labor and negotiate and represent while buying into the premise, instead of organizing and negotiating to question and challenge this to very two-tier system that is a source of the issue. For example, in my personal opinion, pay parity fight is relatively easy for the union leadership to pick up, because it does not have to really challenge that fundamental of two.
Uh-oh. Yeah.
Rika, you cut out.
Two-tier system, right? So when I heard, sorry. How about now?
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe I should go like that without, what if I turn on my camera on? Is that working now?
That works.
Again?
You're
Oh,
working.
okay. I don't know where you lost me, but I think I was going to just start from where I think that you guys all lost me. When I heard about AFT 2121, the agreement of preserving the full-timers for 1 year while cutting more part-timers, I felt like that this two-tier system is literally the internal bomb ticking inside our system that is structured in a way that full-timers, the welfare is built a structure to sacrifice part-timers, just as from a get-go. So I feel like the radical contracts such as the Vancouver contract that should be publicized more, that should be educating people more, so that we don't have to ratify, or we don't have to, ratify what we have now as a two-tier system as the only possible system. Yeah, so that was the little update from local AFT 1493. Good things, bad things happening, but yeah, and then we have been sending our people to CCSF actions, and we are here to collaborate with you all if there are any productions to save affordable higher ed in San Francisco.
Great. Thank you much, Rika, for your presentation. So our next speaker is going to be Karen Panitch. She's a Peralta Federation of Teacher Adjunct Rec and an ESL instructor. Welcome, Karen.
Hi, thank you so much. So yeah, I'm just gonna also, as Rika did, just kind of give a update on sort of things that are going on at Peralta. So I'll start with kind of the good news. As many of you might know, Peralta, and I think it's the first district in the state, and maybe even the whole country or world, that does have 100% part-time parity. So we just got that a few months ago after working for decades on it. And now in all steps and columns, part-time faculty are making the same as full-time for teaching hours. That being said, it's obviously fantastic news, but we're 72nd of the 72 community college districts in California. So I don't know, with the changes in CCSF and these small pay raise for part-timers, and we also full-timers got a little bit of a raise last year as well, if we're gonna move up from that bottom position or not. On top of that, the union negotiated a $1,000 stipend for anybody who transferred their classes to online. So that was we were really happy about that. And then it just came out that same sort of thing for the spring. Everybody will get a $1,000 stipend if you transferred your class to fully online. And another thing that we got was class caps. So they were 32 in the fall and moving for in the spring, and then moving forward in the fall, they're going to be at 34 students in an online class. And if you can agree to have more than that if you want, and those classes will have additional supports. So we signed those 2 MOUs just very recently. And then finally, we managed to stop the plan of cutting 350 sections for the fall. So that was going to take place, and they have agreed to have the same number of sections that we had this semester for next semester, contingent on making sure that our enrollments stay steady or go up, really. So, you know, they've kind of put it a little bit on, you know, we're all supposedly working together to bring up our enrollments, and we assume that they will increase when things get back to normal. But it's a little bit of like, you know, we're trying to cut them off as far as the blame game that's probably going to be coming when enrollments possibly don't go up as high as they want. And then they can say, well, the, you know, teachers didn't, you know, work hard enough to make that happen. So the PFT has had some phone banks where we're calling students, trying to, you know, encourage everybody to enroll. I'm hoping that there'll be some on campus in person enrollment and registration events, but I haven't heard anything about that yet. But the mask mandate just was lifted, so maybe there's some planning around that. What else? So staying on the topic of enrollment. So when you look at Peralta's enrollment between last year and this year, of course, like everybody, because of what's been going on, we had a decline of about 12% overall. But if you look further back to 2018, there's been a steady decline in enrollment of about 20%. So it's pretty steady, it's pretty meaningful, and pretty worrisome. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, what things look like in the fall, and even more in the spring when we're not completely online. All right, what else? Some other news, they had announced, the chancellor had announced that they were going to have 28 new full-time positions that they were hiring for over the 4 colleges. And that's been put on hold. And we don't sort of know where that is at this particular point. We are out of compliance as far as the state mandate that says that full-timers have to make up 75% of faculty and 25% is part-timers. We're at about 50-50 now. I've always found that kind of an interesting mandate because there doesn't seem to be any enforcement and there doesn't seem to be any repercussions for being out of compliance. But there is this thing on the books that says they're supposed to be 75-25. So the board meeting, the Peralta board meeting happened last week, and a bunch of full-timers showed up trying to fight for those 28 positions, or at least some of them to go through, because, you know, with so many part-timers and so full-timers in any departments, of course, they're just totally, you know, overtaxed with work and what they need to do. And we just, obviously, the goal is always to have more full-time positions that hopefully will go to part-timers. Okay, and then finally, we are dealing with a special trustee takeover threat. We had the ACCJC accreditation that seemed to go well. The report was pretty positive. Financially, they seem to feel like we're on the right path, going in the right direction. Their main concern is turnover of our higher administrative positions. We've had 3 or 4 chancellors in the last 2 years, and the very last chancellor, you know, threw a grenade and then went out the door by kind of starting this whole process of possibly having having a special trustee take over. So we're waiting on that decision from the Board of Governors. And we have a letter campaign that we've got going. I think we have about 300 signatures or letters that have been sent, showing that we're not in support of that and that wouldn't be best for Peralta. And like Madeline said about, waiting for what the state's going to allocate and how those monies are going to be allocated, the faculty are trying to get into those decision meetings and not have a situation where they tell us where the money is going to be allocated and it's going to go to facilities and to administrators and, making sure that as much of it as possible will go to hiring new faculty and, keeping classes open and, keeping sections open and, money that goes toward student needs as opposed to facilities. And I think that is a wrap up. And in the discussion period, of course, anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer. And as everybody's been saying, fighting with CCSF over all these months to try to save the situation there. And I am kind of curious to know, it sounds like most of the people that are CCF people at this meeting are voting no on the TA. And I would like to kind of have a bit of a discussion about that if we have time at the end. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Karen. And our next speaker is Rick Baum. He's a faculty member, AFT 2121, rank and filer and adjunct. So welcome, Rick.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. I want to give more of an overview rather than focus so much on City College San Francisco. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that people have. I should say that the tentative agreement's already been voted on and supported, so it's going into effect. What I want to focus on more is what's happening to working class colleges, which is what community colleges are. And what's happening at City College, I don't think is unique. Maybe it's more extreme than elsewhere, but it's happening at CUNY, the City University of New York. And I would say to a certain extent in Peralta, I'm just not familiar with all the colleges. And so maybe people have more input on that. But I want to give an overview. I mean, I have to limit what I can say. And the overview is that we live in a capitalist society. And I want to look at, I think you need to focus on what are the needs of capital and to gain an understanding of what's happening to our institutions and not just our educational institutions. Our society is very much shaped by the needs and interests of capitalism and the requirement to accumulate capital. That means those with capital are constantly trying to find new ways to invest their money to make more money. And at the same time, capitalism is full of contradictions. There are potential and actual conflicts, not only between social classes, but also between holders of capital itself. And if we had time, I could elaborate on how I see that that's happening with regard to shaping educational policies. What does all this have to do with education community colleges? In a capitalist society, the primary purpose of education is to help in the reproduction of capitalism, its ideology, its class relations, and most importantly, to have taxpayers and students pay to be trained to be the future workforce so that businesses do not have to pay for the training themselves, pass it on to others. I mean, for community colleges, that was made succinctly clear by Obama in his 2014 State of the Union address. He expressed his ambitions for community colleges, which were, in his words, to connect companies to community colleges that can help design training to fill their specific needs. So in other words, companies say, we want people trained in these particular areas, and the community college job is to go ahead and do that training so that the companies don't have to pay for it. And even ideally for them, they have a surplus number of people with this training so that they can pay them less money as they compete for their jobs. The purpose of education in a capitalist society, especially for working class schools, is not to create a more educated population that's well-rounded, socially engaged, critical thinkers, though that is what many of us who are educators hope for and seek. Those in charge will say that is their goal. I mean, there's always, people will say that, but the real purpose of education is to meet the changing needs of capitalism. And as I said, they're constantly looking for new ways of making more money. And they have found that public education, there are literally billions of dollars spent there, and they want to get a greater hold on that money. And so what's going on now in the last 30, 40 years, more so than previously, is that activities done previously in-house by public education institutions is now being contracted out with private companies. In the K through 12 schools, we have the development of charter schools. You have building contracts that are of importance, like City College has $845 million to spend on new buildings at the college or to improve the existing buildings. There's also the tech industry, is getting more involved in running institutions, and they want to play a much bigger role in educating people to the point where a lot more classes are going to be online. Again, to keep in mind about places like City College and Peralta is that they primarily are serving a working class students and lower middle class students of color. And I think that that's very significant given the history and the ongoing racism in our country. What are the implications of that? In San Francisco, despite the city growing by some 100,000 people in the last 10 years, the student population has gone from 90,000 10 years ago to 55,000 before the pandemic. Now with the pandemic, it's probably under 40,000. It's been severely downsized. And there's reasons for that, why that's happening, which I'll suggest a couple. The obvious goals for City College is to downsize it and transform it to meet the needs of capitalism. I mean, City College is almost like a university, a two-year university. I've taught at a lot of other community colleges, and most of them do not offer the range of programs that City College has in languages, the arts, and things like that, older adults. And those are the things that are being most targeted, diversity programs, I should add too. Those in charge also, and I think we have to keep this in mind, there's a new administrative paradigm. Normally, the paradigm is one in which you want to grow your institution. I mean, if you're in charge as administrators, you want the organization to grow. I think what we're seeing now is that the new paradigm, and this is what we're faced at City College, is to impose austerity, shrink the college, and have remaining students attend full-time and get in and out in 2 years. That's what's behind the Student Success Task Force, the Guided Pathways, and these other programs that are being imposed or brought down to us from the state. What is happening at City College, more in particular, is that it's more unique to City College, is that property in San Francisco is extremely valuable. It's, has a limited space. By shrinking the college, which they've been very successful at doing, and claiming ongoing budget deficits, and I could give you a history of that. They have a deficit, it's solved, and then there's a new deficit. Depending on the timing, it's gotten more severe in the way that they play that game recently. But unfortunately, they claim budget deficits, which are not only accepted by the administration and the board, but they're accepted by the faculty union leadership. I found it appalling that in the recent negotiations, our union leadership were saying, oh, we're having a $30 million budget deficit this year and a $40 million budget deficit next year. And they were telling us this without providing any proof, claiming saying constantly in negotiations that they were unable to get budget figures for negotiating, but they would still assert this and basically gave justification for the austerity contract that was just imposed upon us. All of a sudden, about a week before they reached this contract settlement, they said the budget deficit had gone from 30 million to 12 million without an explanation. And it's really troubling to me that those who should be championing students and the faculty are buying the line, hook, line, and sinker that the administration puts out. And not only do they claim a budget deficit to stick it to the faculty, but they also claim it to say that, well, we have a lot of property in San Francisco. We need to be able to leverage our property to bring in more money, which is basically playing into the hands of the private developers that are lusting to get their hands on the property that the college has available, so that it becomes available to them. We've been hearing this leveraging our real estate interests over and over again for a number of years now. So just to conclude, for City College, again, I would hope that you could put this in the context that I tried to create, that those in charge have been very successful at transforming the college to downsizing it. And turning it more into a junior college, as Madeline was mentioning, which is just going to have basic classes for someone to get a certificate. If that's what students want, great for them. And so that students can transfer to a four-year college, but forget about all the diverse kinds of programs that the college offers. And to give you an idea of how horrific these people in charge at the school have been recently, when they were proposing cuts to programs a couple of months ago, they included something like a close to 50% cut in the nursing program in the middle of a pandemic when there's a nursing shortage. As far as I'm concerned, anyone even proposing or thinking that way should have been immediately fired. But that's the type of administration that we're dealing with. I mean, they just have little interest in students. And I see that Muriel's here. They were also gutting the DSPS program for students, who are deemed to have disabilities. And that's a program that actually has independent funding. So by cutting it, they're actually cutting out more funding that would be coming into the college. I mean, this is some of the irrationality that we've been having to deal with. And then just yesterday, we learned that they want to give this horrible interim chancellor a huge 24% pay increase after sticking to the teachers. This is not the first time. This is called Salary Gate. They had one a couple of years ago, and they had one about 5 years ago, where they get the teachers to accept cuts in pay, and then they come up with, all of a sudden, even though there's a budget deficit, with more money for administrators. Again, we can talk about that more later. So thanks. I hope this has been helpful.
Okay, thank you, Rick. And Carol Lang, who's a lecturer at CUNY and with the PSC, is unable to make the panels. So our last speaker will be John Holmes, and he is with the Peralta faculty, and he is just been reelected as a representative of the adjuncts. So welcome, Rick, or John.
Yes, together with Karen, of course. And I really appreciate Karen having gone through all the nuts and bolts details of what's going on in Peralta. I'll just add one or two things to that, namely, as someone asked a question about the benefits for part-timers, and I gave an answer to that in the chat, which I urge people to look at. And I'll also mention, I came to Peralta from DVC, which is not known as being the ideal campus with a strong union and strong provisions from part-timers. I was horrified to discover when I was hired at Merit that both the health coverage situation and job security for part-timers was actually weaker at Peralta than it was at DVC, which is, as I said, not notorious for having the strongest union contracts in the world. Now, the cuts at Peralta aren't as devastating as the ones at CCSF. As like Karen said, over the last few years, we've had about 20% cutbacks, which is much less than at CCSF. However, it also has to be remembered that Peralta is in the black. Before the coronavirus and before the lockdowns, Peralta was having some budget problems. At the moment, the budget is in fact balanced, and which I would attribute that to essentially the fact that teaching online is cheaper for colleges than face-to-face classes, which is one of the reasons they like it, and that it is worse for Black, poor, minority students than it is for white, middle-class, upwardly mobile students who often take the classes at the community colleges, because what they really want to do is get into the four-year colleges and treat them as essentially a prep school for the four-year colleges. But it's not so good particularly at Peralta. It's a known fact that our enrollment's been dropping because of Black and poor students not wanting to take classes online and wanting to take their classes face-to-face. But anyway, they have stuck pretty deeply at Peralta, although at least currently, since they're in the black and since there's all this stimulus money, which is apparently heading towards the community colleges, our administration is at least holding the line for the moment and doesn't want further cuts. But those cuts, although not devastating as the ones at CCSF, have been pretty bad too. I teach history at Merit, which is one of the extreme cases. This summer, there will be one, count them, one history class at Merritt College, period. And this fall, there will be only 3 full semester history classes, which is half or even less than half of the history classes we had at Merritt before the coronavirus and the lockdowns devastated our colleges. Now, what I want to mostly talk about is, like Rick, I want to talk about the general situation primarily and supplement some of the very good remarks Rick made. Why it is that the community colleges have been being hard hit with class cuts and downsizing all over California and all over America, even before the coronavirus. And now we've gone from crisis to catastrophe. And the stimulus money being tossed to the administrations of colleges hasn't done much, if anything, to change that yet, when you get right down to it. So instead of going over further details about Peralta, I'm a historian by trade. I want to draw out the overall picture. In the aftermath of World War II, the USA, the greatest winner of that war, was on top of the world economically, militarily, culturally, and in every other way. And that made possible a huge expansion of public education, and especially college education. And one of the results of the radicalization of the 60s was the unionization of the public sector, previously mostly non-union. It may seem strange nowadays, but before the 60s, the public sector was largely non-unionized, and blue-collar workers were, to a very large degree, unionized, the reverse of the current situation. And starting with the blue-collar workforce at the colleges, this crept up the social ladder through the white-collar staff, and finally up to us in the faculty. But in the 1960s and 70s, the United States lost the war in Vietnam, and it's essentially been downhill for America ever since, especially in education. Free tuition, common in public colleges when I was growing up, is mostly gone. And by the way, hopefully people from CCSF will talk about this. The alleged free tuition at CCF hasn't really worked out that way. And I believe Rick may be in the discussion. You can talk about that. I've heard you describing that before. And Joe Biden is talking about free education, community colleges. I suspect that'll work out rather, if it even happens at all. It isn't just a way to get votes for the Democrats in 2022. It'll look a lot like the what is basically the sham of free tuition at CCSF. Expenditures on public education have been in a downward spiral for 50 years now, really. There's less and less for education these days, and more for the police and the military. In a deindustrializing America, whose control over the rest of the world has been gradually diminishing since 9/11, and 2 more losing wars, one in Iraq and one in Afghanistan, which Biden is finally admitting that the US has lost that war and is pulling out. And then, of course, we had the Great Recession of 2008. The American empire, which looked like it was completely dominating the world in the 90s after the Soviet Union collapsed and America won the Cold War, is in big trouble. So the powers that be in this country are becoming less and less interested in educating the population, and more in keeping it in line, preventing the lower classes from causing trouble. The police are feeling their oats and taking out their frustrations on Black people nationwide, unintimidated thus far by the mass rallies against police brutality over the last year. By the way, for people who don't know, there's a recent case right here in Alameda in the East Bay just a few weeks ago, which unfortunately hasn't gotten enough publicity and mass rallies against yet. And that's why it is here in liberal California, the bluest of blue states, the prison system is better funded than education. And as we should all know by now, police brutality and outright murder of Black people is every bit as common as in red states like Texas. Many people have been encouraged by the nice words coming from the mouth of our brand new president, but aside from following Trump's chump change stimulus payments by his own, his actions have not yet matched his words. Nor should they expect that they will. We now have a Democratic president, a Democratic Congress, a Democratic governor, and state legislature here in California. And at Peralta, even a board of trustees that was to a considerable degree elected by my union and has a reputation of being pro-union, the point that the California Board of Governors, appointed by Democratic governors, is seriously thinking of putting in a trustee because they see that Board of Trustees as being too pro-union. And nonetheless, despite all that, classes have been chopped to the bone at Peralta, and our sister campus, CCSF, across the bay, the campus is being ripped to shreds. We can't rely on Democrats to save us. We have to save ourselves. We need to put an end to the old reliance on court suits and lobbying Democrats. At Peralta, with a union-friendly board, we've gotten those nice but still small concessions that Karen narrated, while the cuts are still there. And why is that? That's because the real problem isn't a bad board or a chancellor. The problem is money. The Peralta system has a student population that's heavily poor and non-white. So it, like CCSF, always gets the bad end of the stick in a racist country. We in the whole labor movement need to break from the Democratic Party. The tie between the Democrats and the unions is the curse of the American labor movement. We need a workers' party in alliance with oppressed minorities, Blacks, Latinos, all the oppressed, seeking fundamental social transformation. Ultimately, as long as we're still under a social system in which nothing gets produced unless somebody makes a buck off of it, anything in the public sector like education or health is a secondary sideshow. So what is the answer? Carefully prepared strike action after the model of the so-called Red for Ed school strikes before the coronavirus and the lockdowns paralyzed everything, with mobilization of all community college workers, students, their parents, and the communities they live in defense of higher education for poor and oppressed at our community colleges. At Peralta, because of at least preparing for a strike last contract, we won that hourly wage parity for part-time faculty that Karen talked about. Now we need broader mobilization for broader demands. What's the main obstacle? It is the labor misleaders at the top level of our unions, including faculty unions. And by the way, I'd like to express my appreciation, Rika, for you being willing to be critical from your position of the contract at CCSF. Abandoning the militant methods that built the unions in the 1930s, labor bureaucrats have laid down in the face of relentless attacks on unions while resulting in futile reliance on court suits and lobbying the Democrats. The first thing unions need to do to really defend public education is to break from the Democratic Party. The tie between the Democrats and the unions has to end. We need a workers' party seeking fundamental transformation of society, and to win that party, we'll need a program going beyond the immediate needs of labor that addresses the needs of everyone, first and foremost, the need of Black people for liberation from white supremacy, and indeed the needs of all Americans in the country going down the tubes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. And we're going to open it up for discussion and comments, and I'd ask that people keep their comments to contributions to 2 to 3 minutes, if that's possible. So I guess we'll take a stack. Larry, you're the first one on the stack. You're muted, Larry.
Sorry. The question I had, Karen said Peralta was 72 out of 72. I don't know what that means, 72 what? And the other question, the comment I had was that Rick was saying that they had the cuts for teachers, and in the face of that, they had a big raise for the administrator. I was teaching for 40 years in San Francisco, and I saw that all the time. When they did a cuts for the teachers, and the teachers didn't fight back, and they just rolled over and accepted the cuts, that's what happens. The administration gets a big reward for carrying out these cuts without any protest. That's it.
Okay.
So if I can share my screen, I can show that and Andrew put the list of pay.
Okay, yeah, the screen, you can share the screen.
Yeah, but 72 out of 72 what?
There's 72 community college districts in California, and they're ranked here by salary, by full-time salary. And they've just, basically can you see that? It says master's 5 years experience, and it's step 6. And then here's the ranking. And you like city is, let me see, San Francisco. I'm sorry, here, Peralta, the ranking 72. San Francisco, 23. Let's say San Mateo, high, 4, but Rico was talking about that. Yeah, the best is, what is it? I've never even heard of it. Here, Miracosta. Yeah. And wow, 96,000 bucks they make, step 6. Anyway, that's what I was referring to. Wait, one more thing on top of this though. So at most places, credit classes and non-credit classes have two totally different systems also. So at Peralta, we pay credit classes the same as non-credit. So I make much more money at Peralta teaching non-credit than I ever did at City, and probably ever would at City, because it was so slow moving up the steps.
Did I respond to Larry's question, Steve?
Yes.
Okay, well, a couple of things. I appreciate that Peralta has equal pay for part-timers, but the other thing is you always have to keep in mind that it's not the equal benefits and the job security that full-timers have. And I would really encourage people to learn about the Vancouver Community College system. It's almost like socialism at one school in terms of the treatment of part-timers and full-timers. It's all similar. They have one contract for everyone. I won't elaborate more on it. Also, when there is progress for part-time faculty, that's great, but if you don't have a job, that progress doesn't do you any good. You know, if you want to work, you'd much rather work at 80% pay than 100% pay parity and not have a job, which is one of the problems with this kind of movement under our two-tier contract. And I really want to emphasize that we do have a two-tier contract. I mean, in some ways, higher education might be pioneers in two-tier contracts because it goes back to the early 70s at least. Although even before that, there are two-tier contracts where oftentimes a man would get a job at a higher education facility like a university and get tenure, and his wife, who would be educated, would be given a job but paid next to nothing at the big university. That's going back in the 40s and 50s and 30s from what I understand. For City College, I want to say that we've been told budget deficits every year for the last 10 years. And every time we've had what I would call 3 salary gates. I don't remember the first one, but we passed a contract about 8 years ago, 9 years ago, in which we took a pay cut. And the administration turned around and gave the administration higher pay or pay increase. When this guy Rocha was the chancellor at the college, a contract, he was beginning in January 2019, he was saying we have a major deficit, we have to make all these cuts. And in around July or so, they tried to sneak through huge pay increases as much as 80,000 for administrators per person. And what ended up happening, there's a big outcry against it, and the board gave them a 10% pay increase, which is quite significant. And now we have this latest example where this interim chancellor is getting a 24% pay increase. For everyone saying, oh, it's only 3 months, don't worry about it. But you know, we should have had a permanent chancellor hired a year and a half ago. They keep on having interims, and they were supposed to have a permanent chancellor by something like June 1st. And then they decided to cancel the search because they only had 11 candidates and they weren't satisfied with them. So they may be starting another search and they're supposed to hire someone by October 1st, but we could be told once again that they can't find somebody. And so they'll have another search for another chancellor. So this has been an ongoing thing. And as I said, unfortunately, I'm very much in support of my union and unions at colleges, but they buy the crap that is put out by the administration. Then when they take the pay cut and there's an increase, they make a stink, but you know, then we just go on to live another day. The other thing that's unique at City College, the administration, when you look at the state chancellor's data mart, they show that the average administrator at City College is making something like 25 to 35,000 over the state average. Now, the excuse will be that San Francisco has a high cost of living. Well, fine, but $2,000 more a month to pay for that higher cost of living. And then what about the faculty? For years, students weren't even being paid the minimum wage in San Francisco. They're getting like $11 an hour when the minimum wage was $14 an hour. That has changed. That did change, but that just gives you an idea of the mentality of the people running the college and have been running it for a number of years now since the accreditation crisis.
Okay, Michael Lyon, and then Art Persico, and then Bob Price.
Yeah, I appreciate John Holmes talking about the decline of the U.S. as a world power and how this is likely to mean that the graduates from all levels of education are going to find it harder and harder to get jobs and particularly well-paying jobs. if you look at a lot of foreign countries, students who have put a lot of effort into higher education and can't get jobs have been a revolutionary force. And so I'm wondering how we as teachers would be able to keep track of our students after they've graduated and try to use them as a force to really overturn the system. Thank you.
Okay, Art Persico.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. What I'm hoping to have come out of this, or at some point, is a set of demands that we can make that unify the grassroots response to this, so that we can maximize the impact of, such demands. So, I think we need to be specific and not general when we make demands, so that they're, clear on what it is we want. And I would hope that would unify and make it a more pointed and purposeful kind of process for us. So I hope that can come out of this discussion at some point. Thank you.
Okay, Bob.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate especially the remarks by John and Rick saying that, we really need to break with the Democratic Party. Our unions are just tied to them. And as you both pointed out, the Democrats are in charge of all this money now. And are we really gonna see it come down to the community colleges? We have to insist that some of it does, to all of higher education. With Rick, with what you just answered about the students being paid only $11 an hour up until like 2 years or 3 years ago. Yeah, they did raise the students' pay, but like in my department, we depend a lot on student aides I'm a chemistry instructor at City College. Our number of aides were cut. So they pay them more, but they actually cut, out of the total amount of student workers that there are at the college. So, I mean, they play games like that. And again, these are our Democratic Party politicians. And, I definitely agree with people. We need to push for something like a Labor Party that truly represents our interests instead of the corporate interests that Newsom and all the other Democrats and all of our boards of trustees are catering to, especially the local real estate developer interests. So, thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Our next person is Leslie. Leslie.
Yeah. Hi. Good morning. I hadn't introduced myself before. I was vice president of AFT in the 80s. I was statewide president of the faculty in the 90s. In the second millennium, I was vice chancellor of governmental relations for City College. And in the second decade of the second millennium, I'm an artist. So I would like to suggest a united banner of that keeping the community in the community colleges. And the reason I'm suggesting emphasizing that is that most of the problems that we're talking to are rooting from this massive push at the state level to turn us back into junior colleges. They're really trying to increase the indebtedness of the students. They are trying to ensure all students go full time. The latest May revise from the governor that came out on Friday is a dramatic move of taking the community out of the community colleges. They are pushing common course numbering. That's something we defeated in the 90s that came out of Florida. And what it would have done, for example, in the 80s, City College of San Francisco developed a curriculum for home health aid for people with AIDS, something that never, ever, ever could have gotten in a statewide curriculum, since in the early 80s, that most of the people in the state were terrified of AIDS and didn't want to help anyone with them. But City College stepped out in front and got a certificate to help everyone that was getting sick. Additionally, when we did this in the late 90s out of Charlie Reed coming from Florida, the common course numbering, they said you have to have the common denominator of the CSU system, which happened to be in Bakersfield, Madeline. And in art history, the only art history classes that Bakersfield CSU offered were European art history and a global survey course. So that all of this art history courses offered at City College, history of Latin American art, history of Chicano art, history of Asian American art, history of China. All of that would have not been able to been offered because there was no course number in every single CSU system that matched. In the 50s, before we were community colleges, we didn't even have curriculum committees because CSU just dictated our curriculum to us. Governor put $10 million in Friday into making that happen. We need to keep the community in the community colleges. We need to be able to serve our communities, arts here from the older adult community, as well as the entire student population, I'm assuming. So the older adults pay their taxes, vote for City College every single time a bond measure comes up. And what do? We kick them out. And as a matter of fact, we make money off of those courses because the state pays us and we use part-time instructors. And it is at the non-credit 25 hours rather than 15 hours for credit. So I think that keeping the community in the community college addresses a lot of the issues that we're talking about. And it would be a banner that could actually push back in the state legislature. That's my thoughts.
Thank you. One of the things that hasn't been addressed and needs to is where is the CFT? Where are the statewide education unions? And the rally that we're going to have on the 24th, the CFT should be involved in organizing all the community college faculty and students to be out there. If we're going to get money, and there's a lot of money, 75 billion, going to community colleges to fully fund them, there has to be a political campaign, an education campaign and a political campaign. And the CFT leadership do not want to fight Newsom. They're not putting any demands on Newsom. And that really has to be a real reason that this relationship of the unions to the Democrats is problematic. So in our rally, we need to raise the issue of full funding and against this student success formula, because this was passed in San Francisco. The quote liberal supervisor or representatives, King, Chu, and Weiner all voted for it. There's been no demand by the CFT for repeal of that formula, which is important because Verdian, the chancellor of City College, said, well, I'm just following the formula that was passed by the state legislature. And that is true. He is following the formula. So I think we have to recognize that they actually have a program to corporatize, downsize the community colleges, and it's embedded right now in the laws in California. So there has to be, in addition to asking for money, there has to be a challenge to the privatization. Lumina was pushing that as well as these other groups to basically corporatize our public education system. And I think that's a political issue. And it's a political issue that has to be addressed by the union. So I would urge people to get their locals to endorse the rally press conference on the 24th, and also call for the repeal of this legislation, the formula for community colleges, and for there to be an education campaign, because what we're discussing here, very few people, working people in California, are aware of it. In San Francisco, very few unionists and working people are aware of how the restructuring of our community college system is going to destroy the rights of working class, their kids, to be able to go to community college. Very few people are aware that the music department is being shut down, basically. The nursing department is being shut down. Vocational program is being shut down in San Francisco City College. So these are issues that I think we have to bring up, and we have to raise it programmatically. And we have a list of demands, and we want to involve people and get other colleges involved. We need to there should be at least a monthly meeting, actually, of all community college faculty and students and staff together, developing a plan and a program and a mobilization, because the students, what we're talking about is the right of students to a public education, which should be a strike issue. Students should have the right to a public education, and that's really what's being ripped asunder here. Madeline?
Steve, I've had my hands up for a while, Steve.
Oh, okay. John? Sorry.
These are some very good questions that have been raised. So I put, firstly, the Higher Educators United, which I and Rika have participated in, unfortunately on hiatus right now, wrote up some pretty good demands for the coronavirus crisis, which I just put up the HEU statement in the chat. I'd urge everyone to download that and look that over. And also, I also put up my own election platform, which is I only wrote a few weeks ago, and is a little bit more contemporary for demands that I think should be raised. So I urge everyone here to read them both and see what you think. Now, for Sacramento, I vividly recall that 2 years ago, before the lockdowns, yes, indeed, the Education Union, CFT, CFA, did indeed organize a march on Sacramento, which raised various demands, which were limited but worthwhile. Indeed, what we need is for the unions to do exactly that now, and exactly the barrier to that is that they basically support Governor Newsom and the Democrats in the legislature. And so I believe it would really be desirable to, for us all to put pressure on our unions for another march on Sacramento, even if the demands end up being more limited than the demands that are being suggested here. That would be very valuable. Indeed, what we really need a mass march on Sacramento. We need that more than a press conference. We can get right down to it. And so I'd urge everyone to think about that, take a look at that, and look at the statements that I put up. Thank you.
Okay, I think Madeline, Harry, and then Rick.
Oh yeah, just as we focus on Sacramento and the language of the students' success, it's a oxymoron. It's not a success funding, it's a student entrapment funding. But anyway, the language comes from ALEC. This is that legislative laziness language that is permeating the entire United States. I think you know ALEC, who is mostly supported by Koch money and Illumina so-called foundation, which is student loan money. We have to keep an eye on Washington. The last 4 years, it wasn't, we knew what was there and it was horrible, but it's still horrible, by the way. The news under cabinet member of Ed is a continuation of Lumina influence on the cabinet of Ed from Washington, D.C. And Marisadas, who's head of Lumina, and is much for we shouldn't offer much in the colleges to distract students from the, quote, guided pathway, which is, language misuse. Again, 1984 type language of it's mandatory placement so that students aren't trapped in lifelong debt, $1.7 trillion, I think right now. It's just horrible. So we got to keep an eye on these influences. They're back under Obama. Marisadas ran Washington, D.C. I had some contact people there who said, yeah, so-called, again, liberal, blah, 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 but it's run by this very conservative group of billionaire think tanks who are all for privatization and greed. Back to my greed, it starts with that. And then they're very powerful and they're bullying around California. Who doesn't, I don't know, do they know, do they not know? But the language is there. The student success language was crafted by ALEC. The transfer degree from what we are supposed to have to do now for a transfer degree to the CSU system, crafted by ALEC, voted by legislators who know what they're doing or simply are too lazy to figure out that they're being bullied and just fooled into thinking, because the language sounds wonderful. There are think tanks out there, millions of dollars. The Koch brothers spent millions of dollars to make the language sound good. We're supporting the minorities. We're making the achievement gap slower. Anything, you just have to read it in reverse. You just have to. And we've got to keep our eye on Washington, D.C., because as we speak, they're just peopling the Department of Ed with more of and I hate the term, bad actors.
Okay, Harry?
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate the advocacy I've seen for reopening the older adults department, which is part of the education for older adults at City Colleges responsible for in San Francisco. I just wanted to bring up a couple of things about people mentioned Chancellor Verdian and his contract extended. What I can't understand is he is being rewarded for a couple of things For instance, on the PAC, the Performing Arts Center, he's single-handedly put a stop to the contract, delayed it for 7 months, and that is partly why the college is at risk of losing. We don't know if they'll lose the mural, but having it eventually put into storage. And he refused to discuss his reasons for it, and it's irresponsible. And he basically lied. He said at one point that he wouldn't delay that schedule. Then he said, "I never said that. I couldn't have said that," but he did say it, and that's not the only example. So irresponsible leaders, and it's like the faculty and community people. Do they really have to take a second job of fighting back against the untruths of administrations? Thank you. Thank you for all the contributions today.
Okay, Rick?
Yeah, I know I've talked a lot. I just wanted to fill in some details for people. The contract at City College is really temporary. I mean, the board passed a 5-year budget in December, and that under that budget, assuming it's implemented, they want to cut faculty salaries 21% in nominal dollars. So I think we're looking at big cuts or fight for big cuts in the future by the administration. Verdian, this temporary chancellor, said about a month ago that the state believes that City College should only have 180 full-time faculty. We had over 800 10 years ago. We have about 550 now. So when he says 180, you're talking about a 2/3 cut. I mean, that's what he's saying the state wants. As Madeline has pointed out over the years, that he also said that the state only wants the college to have 18 to 20,000 students, which is in line with the downsizing that's been happening. I think it's happening in Peralta because I don't get it anymore. But at City College, one of the reasons why enrollment is down so much, that for people who aren't familiar with it, is that we don't have a printed schedule put out anymore. And it's not that would be mailed to people's homes and distributed throughout the city. And now there's enticements that could be added to it, which is that tuition is free for San Francisco residents. And there's all this COVID relief money for student aid. And that could be advertised. You sign up for classes and potentially you'll get some money to help you get by. And that's not being done anymore. Instead, we have an online registration system that people can't get through, including retired faculty members, to sign up for classes. And so it's very unfriendly. And in the last semester or two, they haven't even had a PDF of listing all the classes. So they do things that undermine enrollment. And we still don't even have start for enrollment for the fall of 2021 because they haven't put a schedule together yet. We're far behind other colleges that have already done that. Someone was asking just for them to send out a postcard to people's homes, and they're only taking that into consideration. Sending out and printing a schedule does not cost that much money, and it pays for itself. I would estimate that all you need is about 100 full-time students for it to pay for the costs. It could come to about $500,000, maybe more, so then you need 200 students. That would not be difficult to get. Secondly, people always have to keep in mind that for community colleges, they were free before 1985. Now we have, I think John mentioned, we have free city at City College, which is free tuition, but there's a real nasty side to it. If you are a student and you sign up and you take classes for free, and after about 10 weeks, you're flunking the class or you have new job demands that force you to drop out, then it may have been suspended during the pandemic, you have to pay the full tuition. So it's not really free. I know that when it was free in the past, if you signed up for a community college class and you dropped out, you weren't on the hook for $150 if it's a 3-unit class. So that's one of the big flaws of that program. I could talk about it more. I wrote about it on Counterpunch years ago if you're interested. Also, we are talking about the older adult program that's gotten gutted at City College about 1.5 years ago by the then Chancellor Rocha. I should mention that there was an older adult program in Peralta. A lot of what was then Vista College, now Berkeley Community College, was doing. I got my paid job teaching in it. It no longer exists, and it's a kind of another crime that's been committed. It was gutted in the early 1980s for those who aren't familiar with it. So the fact that City College had this program up until a couple of years ago is in some ways kind of amazing, considering what's happened at other places. I'm sure most other community colleges don't even have older adult programs. So thanks. Sorry if I'm talking too much.
Okay, any other speakers who haven't spoken? Don't be shy.
Steve, I'd like to make a couple of comments.
Okay, good.
Roger Scott. Well, sorry, folks, I have trouble with my internet and my landline. I'm calling out on my wife's cell phone at the moment. So I've been working on it an hour and a half. What I heard so far was a lot of opposition, a lot of criticism of the Democratic Party. I join in that. However, I believe that a legitimate workers' party or party of the people is a long-range process. I'd like to see us focus on the political political battles that we have to fight locally and at the state level. One of the things that nobody's mentioned since I've been on is pushing Newsom to fire Oakley. And I think that especially during the recall battle, we have more leverage with Newsom. I think that's a very important issue. And by the way, it's my view that all the battles we're fighting have political solutions. And political solutions are reached, in my view, when you have massive mobilization and civil disobedience, which I keep saying over and over again, and I think most people agree with me, but we need to do it locally and we need to do it in Sacramento. And John said something about the having a statewide mobilization as soon as possible. And I think in the meantime, we need to push Newsom on the firing Oakley. And if we don't succeed on the 24th in getting that message to him, we should have a delegation shut down his office as soon as there is that opportunity. All of these matters, I think, involve privatization and moving somewhat away from the Democratic Party. However, at the moment, there seems to be more momentum than we've had in a long time toward legitimate health care. And that's such an important issue in bargaining for all unions, because healthcare benefits are so expensive now, and there's more time spent on bargaining and negotiating a good healthcare plan than many other issues. So we need to do everything we can locally and at the state level. And if we fight hard, I think we are in a position to make some major gains this year. And as a beat up old guy who's 84, I'm still willing to join in those massive demonstrations, and I don't mind being locked up for a good cause. Thank you.
I don't know, going to jail right now in the pandemic is not the best experience that people can have. If anybody from any other colleges would like to speak?
Well, I assume he's here, Steve, if he wants to. I don't want to put him on the spot, but Arnie Schoenberg is in San Diego, and I don't know about a couple of the other people. I think they're at other colleges besides community colleges. It'd be interesting to hear what's happening there. Well, Arnie unmuted himself, so maybe he's willing to talk.
Yeah, I don't have much to contribute. I'm really impressed by all the history and the institutional knowledge that everyone's bringing here. And Harry's commitment to go to jail for something like this, to me, is very inspiring. Here in San Diego, we're joining the club with all of the situations you've described. I think our, what we call adjuncts cuts have been draconian. We've lost lots of jobs. Most people are down from a 3-class load to a 1-class load. There's this attempt to try to replace some of the part-time faculties with full-time, but there's no money for that, so that's not going to happen. What else can I say? Everything's sort of in the same situation. I think we're low in terms of the pay per faculty in that ranking, but we also have gone some sort of the extras. We've done pretty well in our district here. We've tried to pay for sabbaticals was one of the interesting things. We tried to give part-time faculty sabbaticals. a couple years ago. But I think now with the pandemic and with everything going downhill, I think that program will probably be cut in the next bargaining session. That's about all I can say for an update, and be willing to answer any questions.
Arnie, are they cutting back programs and classes in San Diego? To what degree are they doing that?
I know they've cut class sections all across the board. I know with the pandemic, things like athletics and dance and music took a big hit, but they're trying to bounce back. They have some classes programmed in the summer. They're working on a 10% in-class percentage in the fall, and perhaps a 25% in-class percentage in the spring. But that's just the ratio of in-class versus online. Some departments are going to be hit harder, but in terms of faculty cuts, it's been, they're very proud and bragging about how they haven't had to cut any positions. Of course, that means full-time positions. So part-time faculty are the ones that are the first to get the cut, and then whatever's left, they still are not cutting full-time faculty, but what they're doing is also just not replacing a lot of the faculty that have retired. So those replacement ideas are not happening, and there's no real, I mean, they have the plans to do it, but they're not going to happen. They'll be postponed for at least a couple of years. We've also lost a couple deans in our school, and I'm not sure, I think the movement online was hard for a lot of people. So there's a lot of older faculty retiring, not wanting to do the whole transition for online teaching. And I think a lot of the administrators also are not really interested in this. So it's just one of those interesting things that in the crisis, a lot of things are in flux, a lot of things are in change. And thanks again for this. I just kind of jumped on a whim, but the quality of discussion and education is really a lot higher than I've seen in a lot of these Zoom meetings. So thank you much.
Good. Any other comments, discussion? Do Harry and Madeline still have their hands up?
I put it back up.
Okay, Madeline?
Well, just going back to a comment made at the beginning, describing California as the bluest of the blue. You know, that's not true. I grew up in Bakersfield. I know the Valley mentality, and it's not very blue, let me tell you. And Sacramento is in that environment. And so all that we're going to try to do on the 24th and all, I used to do informal on behalf of the Music Association of Community Colleges, lobbying for maybe 15 years in the halls of Sacramento, and especially the Bay Area, we are not favored, and in particular San Francisco, there's great animosity, and it comes down to personality things sometimes, but just be aware that even our own politicians from the Bay Area, when they get to Sacramento and have their conversations in the elevator and where a lot of lobbying happens, they become friends. Our Phil Tang was a great friend of Bryce Harris, who was just trying desperately to destroy City College of San Francisco, which would have brought down the city of San Francisco. Art Agno said that to me. If City College goes, just the way the school is intertwined with all the functions of the city, San Francisco will lose a worldwide political influence and prominence. I mean, we need to appeal to certain self-interests and know that sometimes that's overcome by these relationships in the hallways of Sacramento, where we are not the bluest of the blue state. As I say, coming from Bakersfield, and I have relatives down there, and no, no, there's a great deal of what Pelosi said or Hillary Clinton said were deplorables. There are deplorables throughout California, and we have to be aware of them, and we have to deal with it. And we have to have a physical presence, more physical, well, nowadays, after we get out of the pandemic, in Sacramento, and point out that they frequently are not friends to the Bay Area, the education. And if education goes down, there goes the influence in all of our politicians. They need to be aware of that, and they're not. Okay.
Karen?
Yeah, I'm just wondering about the part-timers and full-timers. I've become a member of the California part-time faculty. They have a perspective that's different than not different than everybody else, but that what they're supporting often has repercussions for the for other people. For just one example, the part-timers are working to try to repeal two provisions of the Social Security Act that affect 3 to 4% of the population. People who can lose $500 to $1,200 a month of Social Security if they're also, teaching or working in a public service position. I don't really see a lot of other people pushing that. So we have common interests, but we're divided. The City College had a full-time caucus because full-time faculty at the previous contract thought they weren't getting enough support, and it pits us against each other, and then the administration wins. So, but I think an event like this today really is supporting all faculty. So thank you.
Karen?
Yeah, I just put it in the chat. I think where we ending at 1 o'clock. Does that mean we have got 10 more minutes? And I was just wondering, Art and I are both interested in finishing the meeting with some more concrete kind of actions or demands or votes or something that we could say, that we as a group support particular things and work toward moving on those. I don't.
Well, we have a proposed set of demands that we put up. I think, Rick, if you want to put that up again, that we passed at our meeting, that we would like support from other campuses. And it basically in line with what we've been discussing this morning and afternoon. So if people can take a look at them, if people have changes, I mean, I think a critical thing is to get our unions to start being proactive, and taking this up. This is an emergency. It's an emergency for public education. It's an emergency for our whole society, but the unions have to, activate their membership, not just around immediate protest demands, but about a political education campaign against privatization, corporatization, and against the union busting that's going on. And I think that's one of the things that, again, we raised during this recent fight, is that the concession bargaining, which was being pushed, that we've got to, the unions have to give up wages, they got to give this, they got to give that, is a tactic that's been used over many decades, actually, to break down the conditions and the benefits and the strengths of the labor movement. And this ideology of concession bargaining was welcomed, actually. They advertised it 2121 in saying that this is a good thing, that we're going into concession bargaining. All it does is encourages management to continue the assaults. So that's another issue, but that has to be brought up in the context of fighting for demands to defend public education. So the demands are up again. Maybe people could comment on them or say what they think they are, or what if additional demand should be added or should be changed. It's on the chat.
I could read them out also.
Okay, why don't you read them out?
Like one at a time. I mean, this is the order that we came up with. We did this quickly at a HEAT meeting yesterday. Use the multi-billion-dollar surplus to provide full funding for public education. The surplus, I guess, is at least 35 billion. I hear 70 billion. And as you may well know, public education is grossly underfunded in California despite its wealth. Fire State Community College Chancellor Oakley. I should add that the California Federation of Teachers had a resolution passed a couple of years ago calling either no confidence in him or calling for him to be fired. And the student success formula, and keep community in community colleges, and the success, that's the new funding formula where, we didn't spell it out, where colleges are no longer just funded based on enrollment, but based on things like the rate of graduation of students, which we think that's really backwards because a lot of people attend community colleges not to get a degree. And the no repeat of classes provision. If you aren't familiar with that, for years, people could take classes over and over again, like a dance class. Now they're limited to taking, I think, 3 times. And that's hurt enrollment and it's hurt opportunities for students. You know, like an art class, you don't want to just take it once. You may want to take the same class over and over again. And that was frozen out a few years ago by legislation. Immediately closed the online community college named Calbright. That was put up by Jerry Brown. It's ridiculous for a number of reasons. First of all the community colleges now offer online classes, so you don't need a special college doing that. And the money for it should be used for education. I mean, there's just an audit on it that showed only 12 students graduated and they spent tens of millions of dollars on it. Implement the California Master Plan for Higher Education, which was the origins of the California education back in the 50s. Support labor and teacher unions, stop union busting, which is how we view what's been going on, and bring back lifelong learning for the entire community college system. I think that's kind of obvious. So I don't know if people want to comment on them.
Bravo.
Okay, Rick, John rather.
In the next 6 minutes, we don't really have time to thoroughly vet these demands and amend them and so on and so forth. I mean, there might be a few that I might have some questions about, but basically, I think this is the first draft, and we need, and like Karen said, we need to come out of this meeting with something. So I think we just vote to say we support the CCS HEAT demands without going over the details, such as this is the first draft and can be amended after discussion. I mean, I might have at Peralta, my union might want to back away from demanding the firing of Oakley due to the fact that things are on the razor's edge right now as to whether Oakley will or will not try to impose a special trustee. And I imagine my union president would not want to push him over the edge yet. And also the student success formula, I've always been under the impression that that actually, to some degree, benefited colleges with a particularly high enrollment of poor Black and minority students. So I'm not sure precisely how to feel about that. But this is all detail points. I would support a vote by us to endorse the CCSF HEAT program.
Okay, well, there's a motion that will vote on these policies or proposals. And these are the proposals that we would like to take to Sacramento and try to get passed by unions and student groups, to get student groups involved in supporting these as well.